Teacher told a simple woman to solve calculus as a joke. What happened next blew everyone's mind. Story in simple English: in a small, quiet town, there was a high school where the students were used to a routine. Their teachers would come in, give their lessons, and the students would listen, take notes, and leave after school. But there was one teacher, Mr. Jennings, who stood out from the rest. Mr. Jennings was not just any teacher, he was known for his sense of humor, his jokes, and his ability to make even the most boring subjects seem interesting. He had a knack for making the students laugh, but sometimes, his jokes could go too far. On one particular day, in the middle of a regular class, something unexpected happened. The students were all sitting at their desks, listening to Mr. Jennings talk about the complexities of calculus. To most of them, calculus was a subject that seemed like an impossible mountain to climb, full of numbers and equations that made their heads spin. They knew that not everyone could understand it, especially not someone like Sarah, a simple woman who worked as a part-time cleaner in the school and was often seen helping in the cafeteria or picking up after the students. Sarah was well known around the school for being friendly, hardworking, and humble. She had a family to take care of, and though she had a basic education, she had never really pursued anything beyond what she needed to support her children. On this particular day, Mr. Jennings was in the middle of explaining a particularly difficult problem when he glanced over and saw Sarah standing in the back of the room, helping to clean up some chalk dust that had fallen on the floor. A playful idea popped into his head. "Sarah," he said with a mischievous grin, "why don't you come up here and solve this calculus problem for us? You seem like you're good with numbers." The students turned around, some of them chuckling. They all knew that Sarah wasn't a math expert, and her knowledge of higher education subjects was practically non-existent. This was going to be good, they thought. A simple woman like Sarah solving a tough calculus problem. It would be a joke, and they would all get a good laugh at her expense. Mr. Jennings, still grinning, didn't expect anything serious. It was just a joke. But Sarah didn't laugh along with the rest of them. She looked at Mr. Jennings, a little surprised by the challenge but not one to back down from a task. She had seen many of the students struggle with math over the years. She had often been curious about what they were learning, but because of her responsibilities at home, she never had the time to look deeper into these subjects. However, Sarah loved solving puzzles, and to her, math was just another puzzle that needed to be solved. So, without hesitating, she walked up to the chalkboard, much to the surprise of the class. The students' laughter slowly faded as they watched Sarah approach the front of the room. She wasn't in a hurry, but she was focused. She picked up a piece of chalk and began to look at the problem written on the board. The room was quiet. It was clear that no one really expected her to succeed. Mr. Jennings, still with a smirk on his face, waited for her to stumble. After all, it was just a joke. How could a woman with no formal education solve this kind of problem? Sarah took a deep breath and looked at the numbers and symbols on the board. For a moment, she felt a wave of doubt, but it didn't last long. She knew she had the ability to figure this out, even if she wasn't a trained mathematician. Over the years, she had been helping her children with their schoolwork, learning alongside them, often Googling things she didn't understand or borrowing books from the library to help them. She had developed an interest in numbers and patterns. It was something she did in her spare time. But no one knew this. To everyone, she was just a mother and a cleaning lady, not someone who could tackle advanced mathematics. With her eyes focused on the chalkboard, Sarah began writing down the first step of the solution. The class was dead silent now. The students were no longer laughing. They were watching intently, unsure of what to make of it. Mr. Jennings, who had expected Sarah to fumble with the problem and give up, stood frozen, unsure whether to stop her or let her continue. He had no idea what she was about to do. As Sarah worked through the problem, She moved from one step to the next with a calmness and precision that shocked the class. It wasn't that she was moving too fast, but rather that she was moving with the confidence of someone who had spent years studying this kind of work. She didn't seem rushed or panicked. She just wrote the equations as if she had done this 1,000 times before. The students began to whisper among themselves. Was this really happening? Was Sarah really solving a calculus problem? Could it be that they had all underestimated her? One of the students, Jane, who had been struggling with the same problem for days, looked at Sarah with wide eyes. How was she doing this? It was like she was reading the problem like it was a simple math equation. Jane had to admit to herself that maybe she hadn't tried hard enough. Sarah continued writing on the board, and as she reached the final part of the solution, the room was absolutely silent. The teacher, Mr. Jennings, stood still, staring at the board. The students waited for the final answer. Sarah paused for a second, as though checking her work, and then finished with a flourish. The answer was correct. Every step had been executed perfectly. For a moment, no one moved. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes. Mr. Jennings, still trying to process what had just happened, was the first to speak. "Well," he said, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief, "I guess I was wrong about you, Sarah." The class was stunned. What had started as a joke had turned into a moment of complete surprise. Sarah, the woman they had all assumed could never solve such a complex problem, had just proven them all wrong. She had not only solved the problem, but she had done it with a calmness and clarity that no one had expected. The students who had laughed before were now the ones who were speechless. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. Mr. Jennings, now realizing his mistake, could only shake his head, his arrogance replaced by respect. Sarah, with a slight smile, returned to her seat, leaving behind a classroom full of students who would never forget what had just happened. The classroom was still quiet. The students could hardly believe what they had just witnessed. Sarah, the woman they had always seen as just a mother and a part-time worker, had solved the toughest calculus problem they had ever encountered. It was almost as if she had unlocked some hidden secret, a side of her no one had ever expected. And now, as she calmly returned to her seat, there was a shift in the air. What had just happened? How had she done it? Mr. Jennings stood frozen at the front of the classroom, staring at Sarah as if she had just performed a magic trick. He was the one who had dared her to solve the problem, thinking it would be a funny moment for the students. Instead, it had turned into a complete reversal of what he had expected. He had assumed that a simple woman like Sarah, with no formal education in higher math, would make a mistake. But she hadn't. She had solved the problem perfectly, with ease. And now, as he stood there, his initial amusement was replaced with an overwhelming sense of surprise and even a little embarrassment. The class slowly began to murmur among themselves. How did she do that? Jane whispered to her friend beside her. Jane was one of the top students in the class, but she had been struggling with the same problem for days. Sarah had just walked in and solved it as though it were no big deal. Jane's mind was racing. Could it be possible that Sarah knew more than she had let on? Was she hiding some sort of hidden genius? I don't know, her friend replied, still staring at Sarah. I didn't even know she knew what calculus was. Mr. Jennings cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. Well, Sarah, he said, his voice sounding less confident now, that was impressive. He was trying to sound casual, but the weight of his words was obvious. He had never expected to see someone like Sarah solve that kind of problem. He was, to put it simply, blown away. But Sarah wasn't looking for praise. She wasn't even sure how to react to the attention she was getting. She hadn't done it for anyone but herself. In her quiet way, Sarah had always been curious about the world around her. When her children brought home math homework, she would sit down with them and try to figure it out, even if it meant learning along the way. She had spent years teaching herself things she had never had the chance to study in school. She had always been too busy working, raising her kids, and taking care of the home to pursue anything formal. But that didn't mean she didn't enjoy learning, especially when it was about something that fascinated her, like math. She loved solving problems, and calculus, despite how complicated it seemed, was just another puzzle for her to figure out. While the students continued whispering among themselves, Mr. Jennings decided to break the silence. "I have to admit, Sarah, I didn't expect that," he said, his voice more sincere than it had been a moment ago. "I assumed you wouldn't be able to handle something like that. But you've shown me something different." He paused, looking around at the students. "I think we all need to remember that we shouldn't judge others based on what we see on the surface. People are full of surprises." The class was quiet for a moment, and then slowly, one by one, the students began to nod. They had seen Sarah as just a simple woman who worked behind the scenes at the school, doing the things they didn't want to do. But now they saw her in a new light. She was not just someone who cleaned the hallways or served lunch in the cafeteria. She was someone who had a mind for problem solving, who had the ability to tackle challenges that many of them couldn't even begin to understand. Sarah wasn't just a mother and a part-time worker, she was a person with untapped potential. As the days passed, Sarah's story spread quickly throughout the school. It wasn't long before the students began talking about it in the hallways, and soon enough, the news reached the teachers' lounge. Mr. Jennings, still in a state of disbelief, told his fellow teachers about what had happened. "You wouldn't believe it," he said, shaking his head. "Sarah solved that calculus problem like it was nothing. She had no formal training, no background in advanced math, and yet she figured it out in no time. It's like she was born to do it." The other teachers were equally stunned. "Are you serious?" one of them asked, leaning forward. "I've been teaching this subject for years, and I've never seen anyone solve that problem so easily. What's her secret?" "Her secret?" Mr. Jennings replied, laughing softly. "It's not about a secret. It's about how people never really know what others are capable of. Sarah showed us all that there's more to her than meets the eye." As the news continued to spread, students began approaching Sarah, asking her about her background, her knowledge, and how she had solved the problem. Some were curious, some were just trying to make sense of what had happened, and others wanted to learn from her. Sarah was a little uncomfortable with all the attention. She had never wanted to be in the spotlight. But there was something in the way the students looked at her now that made her feel proud. They weren't looking at her as just a simple woman, they were looking at her as someone who had something valuable to offer. One afternoon, after class, Jane approached Sarah in the hallway. "Sarah," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what happened in class. You really impressed me. I've always struggled with calculus, and you just made it look so easy. Do you think you could help me with some of the problems I'm working on?" Sarah smiled warmly at Jane, who had always been one of the top students in the class. "Of course, Jane," she said. "I'd be happy to help. We can work through it together." Over the next few days, Sarah spent time after school helping Jane and other students with their math problems. She wasn't just teaching them the answers, she was showing them how to think through problems step by step, how to approach math with patience and confidence. As Sarah worked with them, she began to realize that she had learned so much more than she had ever thought. She had developed a natural understanding of the subject by teaching herself, but now, she was sharing that knowledge with others, passing it on in a way that was simple and clear. For Sarah, this was a new chapter in her life. She had always been content with her life as a mother and worker, but now she saw the potential to make a bigger impact. She wasn't just a part-time cleaner anymore. She was someone who could inspire others, someone who had something valuable to offer. The students, too, began to see Sarah in a new light. They had underestimated her, but now they understood that they had a lot to learn from her. As the days went by, Sarah's quiet strength and intelligence continued to shine, and the respect she had earned from her fellow students grew. Mr. Jennings, who had once seen her as nothing more than a part-time worker, was now one of her biggest supporters. "You've shown us all, Sarah," he said one day after class, "that learning never stops, no matter where we are in life. You're an inspiration." And Sarah, with a humble smile, knew that this was just the beginning. As the days passed, Sarah found herself becoming more and more involved in the world of mathematics at the school. What started as a simple moment of solving a calculus problem had turned into something far bigger. It wasn't just about the math anymore, it was about the way her story had changed how people saw her. The students, especially those who had been skeptical of her, began to see her as someone they could turn to for help. They no longer saw her as just a cleaner or a simple woman, they saw her as someone with wisdom and knowledge that was worth learning from. Sarah's life, as quiet and simple as it had been before, was beginning to shift in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself staying after school to help students with their homework, explaining complex problems in a way that was clear and easy to understand. She wasn't just a helper, she was becoming a teacher, a mentor. And the more she worked with the students, the more she realized how much she had learned over the years, not just from books, but from the act of teaching herself and from helping her children with their homework. One afternoon, as Sarah was sitting at the desk in the teacher's lounge, taking a quick break before heading home, Mr. Jennings walked in. He had a thoughtful look on his face, and he sat down next to her. "Sarah," he began, "I've been thinking. What you did in class that day, solving that calculus problem, it was incredible. And I've seen how much the students appreciate your help now. I think you have something really special to offer." Sarah glanced up at him, a little surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Mr. Jennings continued, "you've got a real talent for teaching. You're explaining things in ways that the students actually understand. They're learning from you in a way that they never did before. Have you ever thought about pursuing teaching? Maybe even going back to school yourself?" Sarah shook her head, a little overwhelmed by the thought. "I don't know. I've never really considered it. I've always had my hands full with the kids and my job. I never thought I was, well, cut out for that kind of thing." Mr. Jennings smiled, looking at her with a kind expression. "You've got something here, Sarah. I've seen it. Maybe it's time to think about what else you can do with it. There are opportunities out there for people like you. And I know you've got the heart and the mind to succeed." Sarah didn't say anything for a moment. She was too busy thinking about the idea. The thought of going back to school seemed impossible, especially with everything else she had on her plate. But the more she thought about it, the more the idea began to feel right. She had spent so much of her life helping others, teaching her children, and solving problems. What if she could do this in a bigger way? What if she could actually help more people teach others in a way that could make a real difference? As Sarah walked home that evening, the weight of Mr. Jennings' words stayed with her. What if this was the opportunity she had been waiting for? What if she was capable of more than she had ever imagined? She had always loved learning, even when she hadn't had the chance to study formally. Now, after everything that had happened, she began to realize that maybe it wasn't too late for her to take the next step. Maybe there was more to her story than just being a mom and a worker. The next morning, after a long night of thinking, Sarah woke up early, determined to take action. She sat down at her kitchen table with a notebook and began to write down her thoughts. She thought about what she loved to do, what she was good at. And it all came back to teaching. It wasn't just about math, it was about helping others understand things they had never understood before, helping them unlock their own potential. Sarah decided that she would start small. She would continue to help the students after school, but she would also begin to look into education programs. She would look for ways to continue her own learning, maybe take some online classes or enroll in evening courses at the local community college. It didn't matter that she hadn't gone to school for years. She knew she had the skills, the drive, and the heart to make it work. The next day at school, Sarah made her decision known to Mr. Jennings. She walked into the teacher's lounge, where he was preparing for his next class. "Mr. Jennings," she said, her voice a little shaky but confident, "I've been thinking about what you said. And I want to try. I want to learn more and help others more. I'm going to start looking into teaching programs, maybe even take some classes." Mr. Jennings looked up at her, his face lighting up with a smile. "Sarah, that's fantastic. I knew you had it in you. And I'll be here to support you every step of the way. You've got something really special, and I know you'll do great." That evening, after work, Sarah began researching different educational programs. She was amazed at how many opportunities were available for someone like her. There were online courses, part-time programs, and even scholarships for adult learners. It felt like the doors were opening, and she was ready to walk through them. In the weeks that followed, Sarah balanced her work at the school, her responsibilities at home, and her new pursuit of education. It wasn't easy. There were many late nights spent studying after her kids went to bed, and there were moments when she felt overwhelmed. But she didn't give up. She was determined to prove to herself that she could do this. She wasn't just a simple woman anymore, she was someone who had dreams and the ability to make them come true. As she began to take on more math problems, both for her own studies and to help the students, Sarah's confidence grew. She could feel her skills improving, and soon, the students who once turned to her for help with basic problems were asking her for more complex solutions. They were eager to learn from her, and Sarah realized just how much she had to offer. It wasn't just about solving problems, it was about the way she explained things, the way she made them feel capable, even when the problem seemed impossible. One day, as she was helping a group of students after class, Jane, the same student who had first asked Sarah for help, pulled her aside. "Sarah," she said, her voice filled with admiration, "I just wanted to say thank you. I've been struggling with this stuff for so long, and I never thought I could understand it. But you've helped me see it in a whole new way. You're a really great teacher." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. She hadn't expected this, but she was so grateful for the recognition. It made all the hard work worth it. She wasn't just helping the students with their homework, she was helping them believe in themselves. As Sarah's journey continued, she found herself becoming more and more passionate about teaching. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she wanted to help others. It wasn't just about solving equations, it was about making a difference in someone's life. And Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. There was so much more ahead for her, and she was ready to embrace it. This is the expanded part 3 of your story. Would you like me to continue with the next parts? As Sarah continued on her journey, she found that her days were becoming fuller, not just with work, but with opportunities she had never imagined before. It was as if the world was suddenly opening up for her, and she was determined to make the most of it. The simple woman who had once been content with helping her children with their homework had now found herself in a position to help other students, teachers, and even herself. She was no longer just a part-time worker in the school, she was becoming someone who could change lives. The school principal, Mrs. Henderson, had heard about Sarah's newfound involvement in helping students with math. One afternoon, she asked Sarah to meet with her in her office. Sarah was nervous, she wasn't sure what to expect. As she sat down across from Mrs. Henderson, the principal smiled warmly. "Sarah, I've heard a lot of great things about you lately," Mrs. Henderson said, looking at her with admiration. "You've really made an impact on our students, especially with your work in mathematics. I've seen how the students have started coming to you for help, and I've heard nothing but praise. It's clear you've got a talent for teaching. Sarah felt a blush rise in her cheeks. I'm just doing my best, she said softly, not used to all the attention. I enjoy helping the students. They make me feel like I can do more than I ever thought possible. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward, her expression serious. I think you can do even more than you realize. Have you ever considered becoming a teaching assistant? I know you don't have a formal teaching degree, but the way you explain things, the way you help the students understand complex problems, it's something special. We could really use someone like you in our school. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined something like this for herself. Being a teaching assistant? It felt too big, too far from the life she had known. But at the same time, it was exactly what she had been working towards. All those late nights spent studying, all the hours she had spent helping the students, it was beginning to pay off. I don't know, Sarah said hesitantly. I'm just a mother. I never went to school for this. I've been teaching myself along the way. Mrs. Henderson smiled kindly. I understand, Sarah. But you've already proven yourself. You've shown that you have the passion, the dedication, and the skill to make a real difference. And you don't have to have a degree to start. We can work with you, help you get the training you need. But what you've already done here, helping the students, changing the way they approach learning, that's invaluable. I think you have the potential to become a great teacher, if that's something you want. The thought of becoming a teaching assistant, and eventually maybe even a full-time teacher, filled Sarah with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had always been content with her quiet life. She had never dreamed of stepping into a classroom as a teacher, and yet, here she was, being offered a chance to do just that. I'll think about it, Sarah said, feeling overwhelmed by the offer. Thank you for believing in me. Mrs. Henderson nodded. Take your time. But I have no doubt that you would be a great addition to our team. As Sarah left the principal's office that afternoon, her mind was spinning. She had never imagined that her life would take such a dramatic turn. What if she took the offer? What if she went on to become a teacher? Could she really do it? Could she step into a role that was so far removed from the life she had known? The days that followed were filled with a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Sarah spent time reflecting on the possibilities. She talked it over with her children, who were now in their teenage years. They had always been proud of their mom, but now they saw her in a whole new light. They could see how much she loved helping others, and they encouraged her to pursue this new path. You've always taught us to keep going, no matter what, her son, Luke, said one evening. If you want to be a teacher, you should do it. You've already shown everyone that you can do anything. Her daughter, Emma, agreed. Yeah, Mom. You've got this. You're already teaching everyone here, and we know you'd be amazing at it. Go for it. Their support filled Sarah with the courage to take the next step. She had always wanted to give her children the best life possible, and now, they were showing her that it was time for her to follow her own dreams. The next day, Sarah returned to Mrs. Henderson's office, feeling more confident than before. I've thought about it, she said, her voice steady. And I'd like to give the teaching assistant role a try. Mrs. Henderson smiled broadly. I knew you would, she said warmly. I'm so glad to hear that. We'll start with some training, and we'll work together to make sure you have everything you need to succeed. I'm confident you'll make a huge impact. As Sarah began her training, she realized that she was not just learning how to be a teacher, she was learning more about herself. She was discovering strengths and abilities she had never realized she had. She had always been capable of so much more than she had given herself credit for, and now she was embracing that potential. The more she worked with the students, the more she realized how much she loved it. She loved helping them understand the things they once found confusing, and she loved seeing the pride in their eyes when they figured out a tough problem. Before long, Sarah was not just a teaching assistant, she had become a role model for the students. They looked up to her not just because of her ability to teach, but because of her determination and her heart. She was proof that it was never too late to change your life, never too late to learn and grow. The students who had once laughed at her now came to her for help, not just with their homework, but with their dreams. They knew that Sarah's story was one of hope, one of perseverance, and one that showed them that anything was possible. One day, as Sarah was sitting with a group of students after school, one of them turned to her and said, "You know, Sarah, you're more than just a teacher. You're like a superhero." Sarah laughed softly, but the comment made her heart swell with pride. She didn't need a cape or superpowers to make a difference, she just needed the desire to help and the belief in herself that she could do it. And now, she knew, more than ever, that she had the power to change lives not just through math, but through the way she inspired others to believe in themselves. As the school year went on, Sarah's reputation continued to grow. She had become a beloved figure in the school, and she realized that her journey was far from over. She was not just helping students understand math, she was helping them understand the power of hard work, of never giving up, and of always believing that they could be more than what others expected them to be. Sarah had come a long way from the simple woman who once helped her children with their homework. She was now a teacher, a mentor, and a true inspiration to everyone around her. This is the expanded part 4 of your story. Would you like me to continue with the next part? As Sarah settled into her new role as a full-time teaching assistant, life began to feel like it was falling into place in ways she never could have imagined. It wasn't just the recognition or the new responsibilities, it was the feeling that she was finally living a life that truly mattered, a life where she was not only helping herself but helping others too. The students she worked with, once strangers or faces she barely noticed, had become her second family. She was a mentor, a guide, and, in some cases, a source of hope for students who thought they couldn't succeed. One afternoon, as Sarah sat at her desk, grading some homework, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. It had been months since she had solved that calculus problem in front of the class, and everything had changed since then. The simple woman who had once been overlooked was now someone the school depended on. The teachers, the students, and even the principal had all come to see her as someone they could count on. Her children, Luke and Emma, were growing more and more proud of her every day. They had seen their mom take on challenges, juggle her responsibilities, and put in the hard work necessary to create a better future. They had watched her go from a quiet woman who stayed behind the scenes to someone who now walked through the halls of the school with a sense of purpose and pride. They had always known their mom was strong, but now they saw her in a whole new light. One evening, after dinner, Luke looked at his mother with admiration in his eyes. "Mom, I can't believe how much you've changed. You're always helping people, and you've done so much for us. I'm really proud of you." Emma nodded, her eyes shining. "Yeah, you're like a superhero to me. You're helping everyone, and you never give up. I don't know how you do it all." Sarah smiled softly, feeling the warmth of their words. "You two are my inspiration. I've always wanted to give you the best, and I've realized that in order to do that, I have to believe in myself, too." The words came from her heart. She had always put others first, her children, the students, and the people in her life. But now, for the first time, she was starting to believe that she, too, was capable of greatness. She had worked so hard to get to where she was, and it felt good to finally acknowledge that. At school, Sarah's impact was felt every day. She wasn't just helping students pass their classes, she was helping them discover their own potential. She saw students who had once struggled with their studies come to life. James, the quiet boy who had once thought he was incapable of understanding math, was now one of the top students in his class. He had started helping his peers with their homework, paying forward the confidence Sarah had given him. It wasn't just about grades, it was about believing that they were worth something, that they were capable of success. Sarah worked closely with the teachers, helping them with lesson plans, grading, and mentoring the students. She had built strong relationships with the staff, and they had all come to rely on her. Mr. Jennings, the teacher who had once jokingly asked Sarah to solve that calculus problem, was now one of her biggest supporters. He had watched her grow from a quiet, humble woman to a confident, capable teacher's assistant. He often praised her for the positive impact she had on the students. "Sarah," he said one afternoon after class, "I've been thinking about your future here. You've done incredible work with these students, and I think you have what it takes to become a full-time teacher one day. You've got the heart, the dedication, and the passion that this job requires. If you ever want to take the next step, I'll be here to support you." Sarah was taken aback by his words. She had always been focused on helping others, but the thought of becoming a full-time teacher was something she hadn't allowed herself to dream about. She had been so content in her role as a teaching assistant that she hadn't considered what else might be possible. But now, as she listened to Mr. Jennings, she realized that this was another step she could take, another opportunity for growth, for change. "Thank you, Mr. Jennings," Sarah replied, her voice full of gratitude. "I never thought about it, but it's something I might want to pursue one day. I'm just so happy helping the students now." "You're already doing the work of a teacher," Mr. Jennings said, smiling. "You've got everything you need to succeed. Just know that I'll be here to help guide you if you ever want to take that next step." Over the next few months, Sarah began to seriously consider his words. She took a few night classes to improve her knowledge of teaching, and she began studying for the certification exams that would allow her to officially become a teacher. It wasn't easy. There were long nights of studying after her children went to bed, and there were moments when she felt overwhelmed. But she remembered how far she had come. She had already overcome so many challenges, and this was just another hurdle to jump. Her journey wasn't without its obstacles. There were times when Sarah doubted herself, times when she wondered if she could really become a full-time teacher. But each time she felt unsure, she reminded herself of how far she had already come. She had started with nothing more than a desire to help her children, and now she was on the path to becoming a teacher. That thought gave her the strength to keep going. As Sarah prepared for her certification exams, she found herself even more inspired by the students she worked with every day. Their determination, their willingness to learn, it reminded her of herself. They were all striving for something better, and Sarah realized that this journey was not just about her. It was about helping others believe in themselves, helping them realize that they, too, could reach their goals. Finally, after months of hard work, Sarah passed her exams. She was officially a certified teacher, ready to take on the next chapter of her life. She couldn't believe it. She had done it. She had gone from being the woman who solved a calculus problem as a joke to becoming a full-fledged teacher, someone who could inspire and teach others. When Sarah walked into the classroom on her first official day as a teacher, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment she had never known before. She had worked hard to get here, and now she was ready to give everything she had to her students. She wasn't just a mother or a teaching assistant anymore, she was a teacher, and this was her time to make a difference. Looking out at the students in front of her, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. She had started with a single step, solving that calculus problem, and it had led her to a place where she could touch lives, inspire others, and continue to grow. As she spoke to her students, she couldn't help but smile. She was exactly where she was meant to be. This is the expanded part 5 of your story. I hope you find it fitting. Would you like any changes or further elaboration on any part?